José Manuel Barroso was president of the European Commission from 2004 to 2014. For the Europe conversation, he tells me why he believes Crimea will never be returned to Ukraine, but that the West must support Kyiv for as long as it takes. He's also head of the International Vaccine Alliance, where he describes as criminal those spreading disinformation and lies about vaccines. So, President Barroso, it's 10 years since you left as President of the European Commission, and a lot has happened. I mean, even when you started, it was the beginning of enlargement, where we went from 15 countries to 25, then to 28, and now 27.
Yes. So it's, in fact, 20 years before, after my first commission. It was this month, precisely, 20 years ago, and a lot is happening. But I think it's important also to keep in mind that there is continuity. That European institution, par excellence, is the European Commission. And as one of the founding fathers of the European Union said, the European community, Jean Monnet, he said, nothing happens without man. Now we should say nothing happens without people. So nothing happens without man, nothing lasts without institutions. And the European Commission is a great institution.
Well, look, let's go back to 2014, or even further. You know, I think we'd all like to go back to those days and look at what could have been done differently, or maybe not done at all. But like, let's say where we are with Ukraine and Putin. And in 2008, we had the invasion of Georgia. 2014 was obviously Crimea. We also had the assassination of Litvinenko in the UK and so on. And the Baltics were constantly saying to the EU, we need to be much stronger when it comes to Putin and stop being so naive when it comes to Russia, having interdependence when it comes to oil and gas. I mean, what's your assessment of that time now when you look back at the warnings you were given? What was going on?
I think I always like to put Ecclesiastes, the Old Testament of the Bible. There is a time for everything. I think there was some time where we tried, with the best of our efforts, to have a constructive relationship with Russia. And we've tried. But Russia has been changing progressively. Now, okay, some were more keen to understand Russia. Congratulations. By the way, also, to be honest, some of them, they did not prepare for what happened afterwards. So, and they were not always right on some of their positions. Having said that, I think now it's obvious. We had the invasion, a full invasion of Ukraine. What I hope that is now that countries from the north, from the south, from the center, from the periphery, from the east, or from the west, understand that what is at stake is, in fact, for all Europe, and in fact, not only for all Europe, for the world. What we have now is a global conflict. It's not a European conflict. I mean, North Korean military are in Europe now, in one country, invading or fighting against a European country as well. This is very serious. So we need to act together.
But what do you think of the period, I suppose? I mean, do you think that the warnings weren't taken seriously? Was there a belief that in 2014 maybe we shouldn't escalate by applying such extreme sanctions against Russia for Crimea? You know, like, what was the thinking?
I can tell you what was the thinking, because I was in that meeting. What happened was that facing the invasion of Crimea, there were three possibilities. One is to go direct war against Russia. Nobody wants a war against Russia, still today. Another thing was to make a kind of a diplomatic communique, regretting, almost zero. And there was a middle way. A middle way was sanctions. And that's what we approved. And with a strong support from Germany, France, UK, Merkel, Hollande, Cameron. But already then, with some voices against sanctions, the first one was, in fact, Viktor Orban. Orban said, if I don't agree with sanctions, because there will be counter-sanctions, it will be negative for us, but if there is a consensus, I will not oppose it. But others, including the Netherlands, which quite insular, and also Malta, Cyprus, Greece, and Slovakia, were, let's say, with some level of ambiguity.
And the Baltics were for them, I see.
The Baltics were for them. But France and Germany were very strongly for them, and UK. The problem was which kind of sanctions, because then they could not agree, and they asked the Commission to design the sanctions. And then, of course, each country said sanctions, but one country, You can imagine which country said, not financial sanctions, not financial services. Others said, not diamonds, not ships, not agriculture, not farming. Because
we had the discussion in
that's why at the end of the day, the sanction package was relatively minimalist compared to what happened afterwards.
So what should it be? What would, if you went back to that time now, what should have been done?
Well, look, we have to see what was possible at that time. The reality is that the governments were not ready to go further. That is the reality. The Commission will be ready to go further. But the governments were not ready to go further because of their own interests and probably because they thought, and that's instinct, that what I'm going to say now, it's delicate, but I'm going to say it. Because at least in the back of our minds, or the minds of the European governments, was the idea that Crimea is a special case. That's why today, honestly, nobody believes that Ukraine is going to get back Crimea. That's the reality. Okay, and we are trying to support Ukraine, but also at the same time trying to see what could be a possible solution. So this is the problem. It was an extremely difficult situation, but I don't think at that moment it was possible to conceive a much stronger position because, in fact, the governments were not ready for it. Everything at its time. So let's not use that as a pretext not to do now what we should do.
And what should we do now?
I mean, to support Ukraine.
Yeah.
I have no doubts about it. We should support Ukraine. And whatever happens with our American friends, we should support Ukraine. Because if not, it's not only going to be a tragedy for Ukraine, it's a very important country, but it's a tragedy for Europe. And it's going to be the best possible offer we give to the movements against democracy, against international law, against also our own values. If Russia and others that are now supporting Russia continue to say all over the world, including in the so-called global south, that Europe and the West, they are gone, they are decadent, they no longer count, democracy is completely corrupt ideology, we have to do it another way. I mean, what is at stake in Ukraine is a fundamental issue for all the world. The so-called global south is looking.
Just before I let you go, enlargement, do you think Ukraine will be a member of the European Union by 2030, as Charles Michel has said?
I never commit to dates. In fact, why? Because they can be frustrating if you don't achieve them. But I hope and I expect Ukraine one day to be a member of the European Union.
But it's important for Ukraine's future security, so it would have to happen sooner rather than later, right?
Yes, ideally, yes. But
I think the EU is prepared.
But there is a variable here we do not control. When the war is over, we don't know. And secondly, afterwards, both the European Union and Ukraine itself should be ready for becoming a member, which has some criteria that should be respected. That's why I think it's not prudent. I understand that the idea of setting a date is an aspirational date, let's put it like that. But we cannot commit to a date. But yes, but we should, meanwhile, do everything to help Ukraine to become a member. I don't believe that Putin will, I know Putin. Putin is the leader outside the European Union that I met the most during my 10 years in office. I met him 25 times. I know what he feels. And now, when we have hundreds of thousands of young Russians being killed already now, there are 1,200 casualties per day, Russian casualties. Putin does not want to come to the Russian people and say, okay, we have gained some more territory, a little bit of Donbass, a little bit of Crimea now. The goal of Putin was to avoid Ukraine to be a country. I know because I spoke with him about this.
What did he say?
I mean, he said one day, he said to me, why are you defending Ukraine? You know very well that Ukraine is an artificial country created by the CIA and by the European Commission. I told him, look, if it was the European Commission who created Ukraine, I should be informed. So it's completely. So, in fact, he does not want Ukraine to exist, or if it exists, to be a kind of Belarusia, without any independence in foreign policy or in defense terms. It can be a vassal state. This is his goal. So that's why if we are able to make Ukraine member of the European Union, it shows that his goal was not fulfilled. And what is at stake is exactly that. Are we going to support Ukraine in a way that Ukraine can be a country? Or are we going to say, okay, Mr. Putin, you are stronger, we are weak, you can take Ukraine, it's not so important for us. That's the question.
Okay, just before I let you go, you're head of the Global Vaccine Alliance. Are you worried about the backlash, the global backlash against vaccines? We've heard, you know, throughout the COVID period and so on, that people were saying they weren't going to take the vaccine, and then that might impact parents giving their vaccine to children.
Yeah, I am. There is a counter-information very active in the net, made by very... I think they are criminal forces, frankly. I think it's a criminal thing. We know very well, and it has been demonstrated over decades and decades, that countries, for instance, countries in Africa that vaccinated their children, the life expectancy and the child goes up and the child mortality goes down. Others, the neighbors, they don't do it because they don't have the means. Kids die. There is nothing more important in the world than saving the life of our children. I believe nothing more important. And we know by experience, by empirical evidence, that in fact vaccines save lives. It does not mean that one or other vaccine cannot have secondary effects. All medicine have secondary effects. All medicine. But overall, vaccines save life against measles, against polio, against yellow fever, or COVID was a new vaccine, but also against COVID. So yes, there is now a campaign in some sectors for reasons that are hard to understand. Some of these people are completely paranoid. They give up to these conspiracy theories. It's very strange. And what they are doing, from my point of view, is somehow criminal, because they are, in fact, if they have success, they will provoke the death of millions of people.
Okay, José Manuel Barroso, former President of the European Commission, thank you very much for joining us on the Europe Conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.